As many of you know, I was out of town for a good chunk of January on the trip of a lifetime to Egypt with my husband. It was amazing. I'd love to talk to you about it sometime. But I need to tell you that week when I got back, the week following, was rough. Not only was I recovering from a jet lag time period of about 8 hours, but I had been away from our state and this congregation during a really significant and important time and difficult time period for all of us here local here in Minnesota. We took off. I was on my phone scrolling through the news as we were getting set to take off to Istanbul for our connecting flight. And it is there that I saw, literally right before takeoff, that Renee Good had been killed by an ICE agent. And then we took off and we had this fabulous experience, and we were given permission and encouraged by our trip leaders to be fully present where we were. And so our minds were elsewhere, absorbing this trip of a lifetime. And then I came back, as I said, with this 8-hour jet lag, but also an emotional jet lag. Came home and I could see the faces of the people I care for so much back here in Minnesota, deeply grieved. The pain in their eyes, the look of exhaustion, of weariness. They had been through so much while I was away. And so that week was spent trying to catch up in so many ways. That week I came back, I was so grateful for the support of colleagues, clergy colleagues, in particular, a clergy prayer gathering we had that Thursday that I came back. This prayer gathering we have once a month. This one was different. We had 4 prayer stations. I was one of the stations, so I actually didn't get to participate in the other 3. I was praying over colleagues one-on-one in prayer. But let me tell you about the other 3 stations. There was a station called the Wailing Wall, where people were encouraged to write their sadness, what makes them weep, on Post-it notes and to put it right on the wall as a form of wailing wall, as a form of lament, which is a really holy way to engage and relate with God, to let God know what's on our hearts and what troubles us and where we grieve. And then the next station was a station of joys. So lest we be always focused on what makes us weep, although there is so much, there is also always something to be joyous about. So we're encouraged to write down our joys at another station. And then the final station was a chance to light a candle. To me, that candle represents hope. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And so to me, when we light a candle, it represents Jesus's light and hope in our world. So as I said, I didn't participate in those stations. So I'll tell you how I may have participated if I could have. The Wailing Wall. I don't think I need to tell you what I would have put on the Wailing Wall. There are so many deeply troubling and disturbing reports of violence and oppression on our streets here in not just Minneapolis, but right here in Eagan and in the South Metro, firsthand, secondhand reports of civil rights abuses to citizens and non-citizens alike. It's deeply troubling. If you're watching from out of state and you want to have a conversation about this, I would welcome the conversation. But bottom line, that makes me, and many of you, many of us around here, makes us weep. That's something I would have put on the Wailing Wall. But then there's joy. And isn't that the dynamic of life? There is always joy even in our sorrows. And so I'll tell you what brought me joy this last week. A week ago during worship, last Sunday, there was a little girl who shall remain nameless, 3 years old, who had a fabulous dress on at worship. And at the end of worship each week, we invite kids of any age come forward, play an instrument, a tambourine, a maraca, and kind of ring us out on our last song. So she came up, but she didn't play an instrument that day. She twirled in circles for, 2, 3, however many minutes that song was. She twirled and she twirled and she twirled, and this fabulous dress shot out from her in this beautiful way, and she was watching her dress as she spun and she spun and she spun, and all eyes of the congregation were on her because she was a spark of joy. That brings me joy. What else brings me joy and great hope and great pride is the response of Minnesotans in what is a historical time for us. People are coming out of the woodwork, a grassroots movement, to help and to love the neighbor, to do all the things that need to be done to make sure that those who are sheltering in place get food to eat. What needs to be done to make sure that our voices are heard at all levels of government, what needs to be done to observe on the streets where activities are taking place and to document if the Constitution is being followed or not. People who risk putting themselves in harm's way. And it is this vast, unbelievable network that I have heard referred to by one commentator as the Minnesota miracle. That brings me joy. So what brings me hope? I'll tell you what brings me hope. It is a line from our scripture today. We're talking about the Beatitudes. Jesus is on the mountain, and he is giving us a very common list of blessings that is part of the Gospel of Matthew. One of his blessings says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. There are so many reasons and ways to mourn. We may mourn something in our individual lives. We may mourn somebody's death, someone's passing. But this sense of mourning in our gospel is also much bigger. Those who mourn a world that is not yet as it should be. Those who mourn brokenness of our society. Blessed are those who mourn, Jesus says, and he proclaims this as he sits and teaches his disciples on a mountaintop. And he's referring to the crowds that have surrounded them, that have crowded them, who have come to follow Jesus because they've seen this hope that he can offer them, this hope and healing and new life. And these crowds knew what it meant to mourn. These crowds, scholars say that 70 to 80% of the people in that region, they were barely existing subsistence levels of income, meaning they could only afford the bare necessities to survive. They were deeply in poverty. They were poor. They were food insecure. There was disease. There was lack of adequate health care. There was an inability to affect change around them due to the overarching political system. They were Jewish Palestinians under Roman occupation. And that's who these crowds were that Jesus proclaims a blessing upon them. Blessed are you who mourn, for you will be comforted. Now, how is it that Jesus can proclaim a blessing on these people? It's important to remember what a blessing actually is. Sometimes we are mistaken in our world and we think, well, we got a new car or a new job or a raise, and boy, am I blessed. That's not what blessing means, because blessing means in this instance, in this context, what Jesus was proclaiming was a blessing that meant divine favor. What it meant was that God sees you and loves you and cares about you. It's more like when someone sneezes and you say, bless you, you're not saying that, boy, that's awesome, you sneezed. You're saying, may you be well. I see you. I hope you don't get sick. That's what bless you means. And the blessing from Jesus is on those who mourn. God sees you, and that's an important message for us. If you find yourself grieving or mourning, my message for you today is that God has not forgotten you. Jesus is blessing you even in your current situation, meaning Jesus sees you, loves you, knows you. And that's not the end of the story, because Jesus says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Their pain, your pain, my pain, is never the end of the story. It's not you may be comforted or you might be. It is you will be comforted. God sees you, God blesses you where you're at, and promises you comfort for the future. Hear these words from Mahatma Gandhi. He was the leader of the nonviolent movement in India to establish Indian independence from British rule. And I have a quote I'm going to read to you. He said, "When I despair, This is Mahatma Gandhi. When I despair, I remember that all through history, the way of truth and love have always won. There have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time they can seem invincible, but in the end, they always fail. Think of it. Always. Jesus' promise on that mountaintop is that you will be comforted. The hope we have in Jesus is in remembering that when Jesus rose from the dead and he rose from that grave, he defeated evil and showed that love is more powerful than hate. And so in the meantime, as we wait for that comfort to come in full, this full promise Jesus is giving us, we also acknowledge that we live in the meantime. We live and walk the way of love, but we walk in a world that is filled with both joy and sorrow. We live in a world where we need to post our Post-its on the Wailing Wall, but we can also rejoice in our joys. My star word this year, we talked about that last week if you've been following along, we gave out little paper stars, a word for you to help you remember God is with you this year and maybe steer direct a spiritual journey perhaps. My word was appreciate. And perhaps that's God's message to me to remember that we live in this world of duality. There is joy and there is sorrow, but don't forget to appreciate the joy. There is a word I've mentioned in a sermon previously, but it's been a while, so I'm going to offer it up to you again. It was coined by Glennon Doyle, who is an author, a writer, a blogger online. The word is brutiful. Brutiful. Meaning, she says this world is brutiful. It is both brutal and beautiful. There is joy and there is pain. That's simply the way it is. And in the meantime, while we wait for God's ultimate restoration and comfort, which will come, it is a promise. In the meantime, we walk in this way of love and we walk this way together. Together we embrace the joys of life and together we console each other in our sorrows. And together we walk this walk with God, with Jesus, who promises from that mountaintop that you are seen by God, known by God, and for that reason, you are blessed. Thanks be to God. Amen.